Good morning and welcome to our webinar. We will discuss all aspects to the creation of customized web pages in the OrionLX. This webinar is going to take about an hour and a half. We should have some time at the end for a couple questions. Topics we'll cover: we'll introduce you to WebServer. We'll give you some online examples. We have a simulator that is an online functional simulator. We can show you standard web pages that are served from Orion, plus pre-formatted web pages. These pre-formatted pages are provided as part of optional capabilities like alarm annunciation and sequence of events. And then we'll go through about a dozen different customized web pages that are part of the simulator. Talk about the steps to get started, loading in the SVG editor called Inkscape, how to load that in, and also the plugin that is provided that simplifies the animation. Cover the options that are required to do WebServer customized graphics on the OrionLX. Then we'll create some pages, go through the steps, selecting the points, drawing, copying, pasting, etc. And then of course the animation and loading the pages. We'll add controllable elements, breaker trip close, switch open close. We'll show how you can change the dialog box and how you can integrate that with your NCD file. Talk about adding optional blinking, so you can blink an element that's in alarm. Also tagging, informational tags and control tags to restrict operation. Indirect addressing will be covered. We'll talk about how the use of indirect addressing or wildcards can reduce your configuration effort. This is where you'd have a large number of graphic elements that need to be repeated, and it would show the process to simplify the population of all the points on those common graphic screens. We'll cover how to make the pages secure, how to lock out people based on IP address, how to use encrypted protocols, how to set up certain privileges so that only authorized operators can control devices or acknowledge alarms. And then we'll talk about the different options for viewing web pages. There are basically two ways. You can use a browser, a PC-based browser, or you also can view web pages by connecting a monitor to the direct video VGA port on the latest Orions. The demo system that we'll use today comprises of a laptop PC. It talks Ethernet to the Orion through a switch, and there's a Schweitzer relay that's part of the demo system, a DDIO, distributed I/O module, and a Bytronix 650 panel instrument. You can see some of the IP addresses there, and we'll be using this live demo system to simulate and show some of the things that illustrate concepts. I guess the first question is, what is WebServer? Well, pretty simple. WebServer is web pages served from the OrionLX. There are three types: standard web pages, pre-formatted and customized, and two ways to view web pages from a PC or directly from the Orion using the VGA monitor. It's important to understand the data flow in the OrionLX in order to understand how some of these applications work. In this diagram we have the IEDs depicted with a load of bricks representing the data. We have Orion read data from the slave IEDs, and Orion reads a subset of the available data, and then applications in the Orion use these data, applications like SCADA, Math and Logic, email, and web pages. So you can think of those applications as clients that use data that reside in the OrionLX. We look a little closer at the data that's served out to web pages. In the OrionLX, sends data to the web page development environment to animate the screens, and also data is passed back from the web pages to the Orion, and XML is the technique for data transfer.
All right. The first thing I'd like to show you are some standard pages. We'll go through this quickly, but as I mentioned, web servers made up of standard pages, pre-formatted, and custom pages. This is an example of a standard page. This shows the information about the system. It lists all of the custom pages to the right. We'll look at that in just a second. You can go to the Devices tab. This shows the devices that Orion's communicating with. In this case, the Schweitzer relay, the DDIO on serial and Ethernet, and the Bitronics instrument. There's information, standard files page. You can see the files that are available inside the Orion. It shows which one is running. The active file is the one that's running. And the web pages that have been loaded to the Orion are shown down here. These are all standard pages. Every Orion comes with these pages. And then there are pages, what we call pre-formatted pages. And pre-formatted pages come with certain options. In case of, if you buy the Alarm Archive module, you get standard or pre-formatted pages. Now this is an alarm summary, so if I disconnect the communications to the Bitronics instrument, I should get an alarm. In this case, this is the way we set up the alarm. We set it up so that an active, unacknowledged alarm is red. In this case, this message comes up. This is a pre-formatted message where we said, let's say, no communication to Bitronics. I can acknowledge that. We've also set the colors. Red means an unacknowledged active alarm. If I acknowledge the selected alarm there, it should change color. We've designated orange as the color for an active and acknowledged alarm. And if I plug the communication cable back in, that should go away. This is a simple alarm annunciator, and we also enable customers to view an archive of all of the alarms that have occurred. So over the past several hours, as we set up the demo, there's pages and pages of alarms. That's an alarm archive, again, a pre-formatted web page. In addition, we have a page called an archive page. That's basically a sequence of events page. And if I was to toggle input point 10 or 12 times, I could get an update of points that were timestamped in the Orion. There they are. You can see 11, 48, 34, 599, and that's offset by 5 hours from UTC time. And you can see the toggling in the value column, 0, 1, etc. Again, this is a pre-formatted page that comes with the sequence of events and alarming module. Going back to the home page, we can show some custom pages. You could have a custom page for some switchgear. This is the page from a customer out in the Southwest that uses quite a bit of web-based technology. That purple color that you see there, that means there's no active data populating that screen. We're creating some data pages for our solar panels that and the weather center that powers our corporate office. It's different examples of pages. Switchgear. Again, these are custom pages that have been developed. Also, we created a custom page that summarizes some of what's going on in that active demo. And this demo has, again, the Bitronics instrument, the DDIO, the Orion, the Schweitzer. And this is an active demo, so if we disconnect comms, obviously we'll see comm OK go to comm fail. That's a matter of hiding one message and bringing up another message.
Are these pages, do they have any zoom or pan capability?
Zoom and pan are not included in the capabilities of our web server at this time. You can link to other pages. You can link to a page. A lot of people will use a zoom page where you'll click on a breaker, and instead of going directly into a dialog box, you might go to a zoom page that shows the relay, and then that relay can provide you control options and more data. An example of a page that has a little bit of control and some controllable elements, and by animating this, we can make it so that a switch that I turn on and off in my demonstration system can animate the element. We'll show how that's animated in just a second. We'll also get into how some of these devices can be set up for control, where we can control an element here, and the switch will open. I put some logic into the Orion so that the switch closes itself after 10 seconds goes back. We will go through how this is done. But what I wanted to do is just to show you that there are lots of different kinds of pages. Here's a page from Google Maps where we've superimposed some drawing elements on top. So that gives you an idea of some of the pages. Now let's talk a little bit more about what it takes to actually create these pages and link them with data. We'll go back on the content. I'll go back to here. One concept that's important when understanding how the Orion processes data and how it handles certain applications is this little diagram here. Helps illustrate it. In this case, the slave IEDs have data inside them represented by bricks, and Orion will read the data, and this graphically shows that not all the data in the IED needs to be read by the Orion, just a portion of it. And then there are applications in Orion that use the data. For instance, if SCADA needs to read data from the Orion, SCADA is a user of data in the Orion, just like Math and Logic uses data, email uses data, and Webpages use data. Each of these applications that use data need to have the data points defined as to which points are going to be made available. Now with Webpages, the data that's used to animate Webpages uses a mechanism called XML. You think of XML as a way of taking the data that's in the OrionLX database and using it to animate screens. Custom web page development environment is the SVG editor, and XML provides a way of moving the data into those screens, and also a way to send control commands down to control devices. We'll use the term XML a number of times in this demonstration. The Inkscape SVG graphics editor is an open source editor. It can be loaded down from the website or from the internet. And it's not the only SVG graphics editor that can be used to create pages, but it happens to be one that we can support. And we also have a plugin that is provided with NCD that makes the animation a lot simpler. The OrionLX also must have the XML slave protocol, and obviously you want to make sure that NCD and the Orion have the latest firmware. And like I said, the NCD3 program has a plug-in to simplify the animation, and we'll show that in just a second. And then we configure NCD. That's the first step. We select the points to be read from the IEDs, create any logic points, and then we select points and files to be made available to the web pages through XML. What we'll do is we'll go online with NCD, and I'll show you what some of that looks like. Okay. So opening up NCD, everybody should be seeing the opening splash screen there. This is the configuration that's used for our demo, and what I wanted to show you is the XML. Again, XML is a mechanism for moving the data into the web page environment. And if I open up XML, the first thing I wanted to show you was this tab here. This summarizes the points that are used in the web pages. And the way I select these points, the left side here represents all of the points that are in the Orion database, all the points that have been read from the Schweitzer 501 and internal Orion points, points from the DDIO, points from the Bitronics instrument. These are all the points that we've selected, and there's several hundred points there. But not all of those points are to be used in web pages. Some of those points are going to be passed on to SCADA. Some of those points might be used in Logic. Maybe some of those points are used in email, emailing out events for Schweitzer relays, for instance. But about 20 of those points, we move over to the center pane here. The way we do that, we highlight the point, and then we move it over with that arrow there. So all these points here are points that are to be used to animate our web pages. Those are the input points. We also have output points. These are, on the left side, this is the total number of points that have been designated as controllable by Orion. We've selected 5 points that will be used in our animated web pages. These are elements that are going to be controlled through the web pages. If you go back to our files page, it introduces the concept of this XML file. Think about the points that you select as going into a file, and that file is moved over into the web page environment so that you can animate these pages. You do have the ability to select as many files as you would like. In the case of this demonstration, we don't have that many points that are animating half a dozen different pages, so I put all the points into one page or into one file. If you had 25 web pages, and each web page may have 50 or 100 or 200 points in there, I'd suggest putting the points that are to be used to animate each of those web pages into each of their separate files. So this is where you could create a new file. You create a new file, file XML. And so you can create multiple XML files, and then when you select your points over here, you can designate which points go into which XML file. Again, it would work with all of them in one file, but it makes more sense to designate the points that are to be used on a given page with a given file if there's a lot of points. So that gives you a little idea there. We'll come back to this when we get into controllable elements. We'll get back to this, and I'll show you how you set up some of your dialog boxes on your breaker, open, close, and things like that, because some of that's in MCD. At this point, we're going to go back to drawing the page itself. There we go. First step is you open up Inkscape. And when you open up Inkscape, you'll be presented with a palette where you do your drawing. First thing you select is the approximate size of the display device that's going to be showing the pages. In this case, 1600 by 1200 gets me the right aspect ratio for the screen that I'm using here. You can select anything. And it's not important that you have a perfect match. It's just a matter of using up the entire viewable area most efficiently. So you select that. Next, I wanted to show you that you can use your menus across the top of the screen, or you can use a collection of keystrokes to simplify this. A lot of our more advanced users would simply select Control-Shift-D to get to this point. And then we select our background and border colors. Again, there are menu selections, or you can select them other techniques. There's a half a dozen different ways of selecting colors. I like using the color wheel. This wheel is great. You just put your cursor on the color in the perimeter of that wheel there, and then you can get the shading and the opaqueness using these other techniques. It's very easy to select colors using the color wheel. but there are other palettes and things where you can change, you can select colors. In this case, we've selected gray as our background color and black as our border color. I like to use a grid when drawing. The grid is similar to the grid that you might use in PowerPoint. You can select the grid size, and then your elements can snap to the grid for a better looking drawing. The grid is not visible unless you want it to be. It doesn't have to be visible in the final product. It's just used as a drawing aid. Since we're drawing a page, we need to put in certain parameters that will determine how that page is going to be animated and how it's going to be viewed. And some of those key parameters: refresh time, retries, timeout, and which XML data file will be used to animate this page. These values are filled in by default, but you do want to double check these because you may want certain pages to have a shorter or longer refresh time, and you may have designated multiple XML data files, and you want to associate the data file with the page that you are creating.
So what are the units for the refresh time?
Seconds.
Seconds, and can it be more than one?
Oh, refresh time is milliseconds.
Oh,
I'm sorry, that's
milliseconds.
milliseconds. Yeah, 2,000 milliseconds is the refresh time.
And XML data file is just one file?
There can be, it defaults to one file. The question is there only one file? It defaults to one file unless you have selected your points to go into multiple files. And in that case, you'll have to enter in which XML file is appropriate or associated with the page that you're drawing.
Okay, but only one per page? One per page,
okay. That's right. Good question. Now we can get into the actual drawing of the page. The drawing tools, there's same kind of tools that you'd find in any good drawing editor. And anybody that's worked with PowerPoint or Paint or Visio pretty much understands this. The drawing is not the difficult part. It's pretty easy to put the elements down there. The challenging part in any project is linking and animating the data and making the pages flow nicely. But drawing, not challenging. We also provide a large library of images. We've done hundreds of different images. We do provide some inside of your NCD program. When you load NCD, you'll notice there's some Inkscape drawing images. But we also have hundreds of ones that we've done in our systems group. So as you get started on a project, talk to us and we can forward you images to simplify things. And like I say, we have a large collection of buttons and transformers and breakers and switches and relays and things that we can share. Let's get started. We'll draw a very simple collection of breakers along a bus section. We start by drawing a line. We can select the stroke style and the stroke color. We can select the width and the color. Very easy to do. Next, we would select a shape. In this case, this is going to be an animated breaker. For the purpose of keeping this simple, we'll just make that a square. You can round the corners off if you want. There's all kinds of things you can do. You can select the color. And then next we get into the fun part. That's the animation of it. Remember earlier we mentioned that there's a plugin that we can put into the Inkscape editor. Well, that plugin is this HMI you see up here. At the top there, the HMI. And that HMI basically gives you a window where you can select your animation parameters. In this case, the window shows the NCD file that happens to be open in NCD. So if you have NCD, the Orion configuration program, open on your computer, and you open up this HMI plugin in your Inkscape environment, it will default to that NCD file. You can select other NCD files that are on your hard drive, but it does default to the file that's open, which is convenient. Also, you can have multiple Orions, as in a cascaded setup, so you can designate which Orion this is. Then you select your XML file, and then all those points that we had designated as points to be used to animate the drawing, all those points will be listed in a drop-down menu. In this case, we're designating a binary color display. That means a graphical element that will change color based upon the state of a given point. In this case, when point 1 is on, this color will be red. So the little square will be red. If point 1 at the DDIO is off, then it goes to green. This is completely under your control, and you can set this up any way that you want. In addition, there's, as I had mentioned before, those are the points. Those are all the points that we had put into the XML file to be used to animate. But I was going to say, there's also a ability to hide. So you can make it so that an image appears or hides based upon a value that's changing. In this case, point 1, input point 1, when that point is, let's just say, less than 0.5 or equal to 1, or however you want to set it up, you could cause that image to disappear. So you can make something appear or disappear based upon a data point being above or below a threshold, or on or off. It's very convenient when you have a lot of things on the screen where only one of those things needs to be displayed at one time. It could be alarm messages, it could be a photograph, it could be anything that you want to appear or disappear based upon a condition that changes in real time. Next thing we do on our diagram here is we would add in static text, and that's exactly as it sounds. It's text that appears on the screen all the time. You type that in, select the font, and bold, italic, whatever. Then you enter the text to be animated. And most folks will typically use little placeholders, little number signs. Those are the placeholders, and then when you animate them, when you want to animate them, you click on them, highlight them, bring down your HMI plugin, and this is where you associate that highlighted text area with a value that is to populate it in real time. In this case, amps A at Bytronics M650 is the data point that will be used to animate that value on the screen there, that section of the screen. You can select your decimal places, etc. And you do this for the other points, moving from point to point. One nice thing here is after you have one breaker set up, you can copy and paste. And by dragging the cursor around the configured elements in, say, the leftmost image there, if you drag your cursor around phase A, B, C, and all that, and that red square, you can copy and paste that along that bus section. And one of the things that's nice is that the parameters that you had previously configured in that get copied and pasted over, those parameters stay the same. So most of the logical arguments and colors and things like that will be retained. All you need to do in this case is make sure that you select the actual data point that will be used in that phase A, B, C amps. And that will be a point that will be selected from the drop-down menu under points. Now later on in this presentation, we'll talk about a technique to reduce some labor further in this type of effort by using indirect addressing. That's where all of these point names will be an indirect address, and will populate a value that brings in as you select the page. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And if we click on breaker, the breaker in the third position there, you'll see that the parameters have been, the properties and parameters have been retained for that as well. If you want to link to other pages, you can either use a link bar at the top, which we'll show you in a few minutes, or you can just put a button on the page. And if you right-click on that button, you can put the URL for that page into the link properties. So in this case, the button that says Go to Other Page has associated with it the address for the page, which says href upper left-hand corner. That's the address of the page that you want to go to when you click on that button that says Go to Other Page. You can copy and paste photographs and images into your custom pages. Just an example of some Vitronics instruments, the rear view of the OrionLX, and a map of Cleveland. One thing that's nice, as I mentioned before, is these photographs can appear or disappear based upon some logical real-time condition. So in this case, when input 8 is less than or equal to a value that we put in there, then that image that's highlighted would disappear, would be hidden. Talk a little bit about controls through web pages. Basically, any output point in the Orion database, any output point in any IED or any I/O module that you've set up can be controlled through the web page. And basic steps to do that. Okay, basically the steps are you would first make sure those output points are mapped through on your master ports on your Orion. Then you would make sure that they are moved into the XML slave on the output side. And then you'd set up your dialog for each of those output points. Typically, when you control things through a web page, you have a dialog box that says, do you want to open that switch? Are you sure? Things like that. So those dialogs also be set up, and we'll show you that in just a second. So again, output points must be mapped, then mapped to XML. You associate your graphical elements with the control output points. And then the final step, save the page. The administrator sets up Orion Web User and Web Security settings, transfer the SVG page and the NCV files to the Orion. Let's go back online, and we'll show you some controllable elements. Show you some controllable elements. I go to my demo page. We have a device control screen here, and as I had showed you here, there's controllable elements right here. So this is the default controllable element screen where we give the alias name. And these are dialogues, and I'll show you where we enter these kind of things. These are user selectable. And so we can say yes, open switch. And then, again, these dialogues are configured parameters. Come out as a parameter. It says that once you do that, you have to make a decision pretty quickly because you don't want a selection hanging there forever without somebody pulling the trigger and making the final decision. And again, I put logic in there to close that back down. And there's controllable elements on this one as well. Breaker trip close, and we can do the same thing there. Let's take a look at what some of the coding looks like behind that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up first Inkscape just to show you what that looks like. So we'll open up that page in Inkscape. So I'll show you how we drew some of that stuff. This is Inkscape when we open it up, and I'm going to open that device control screen. And so think of this as an editor, and this has, and we'll go into tagging in just a second. This is the way that we drew this screen here, and it shows all of the items that we drew. We drew the blocks, we designated the colors, and we linked them all up. We have text that appears and disappears. One text says switch open, the other one says switch closed, or breaker open, breaker closed. We also configured some custom tags here. These custom tags, when enabled, will appear or disappear based upon whether an operator put a tag. And the term tag refers to as an informational or control tag that either lets the operator know about a condition that should be known before control is attempted, or blocks control, either blocks the closing of a device or blocks both the opening and closing of a device. These are the different kinds of tags. And again, we'll go into that in a second, but let's focus on control at this point. So what I've done here is I've highlighted that. I go to my extensions, HMI, and what you can see here, you should be able to see here, it's coming out a little bit dark. It's a little dark. And if I can lighten that up, I don't know if you can see that. If you could see it, you'd see that there is a control point designated. And I apologize if you can't see that. But there's a control point that has been selected from your control outputs. And what it says is that that element is a controllable element. And that's where you select that. You also can say, I want this square to turn different colors based upon different conditions. So that's where you show that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to NCD, and I'll show you how you set up your dialog in NCD. Go to NCD. Remember, we set up our points in XML. These are the input points that will be used in our web pages, and these are the output points for devices that will be controlled. The switch that we just looked at uses a pulse output, and the parameters for what I want to appear in the dialog box are entered right here. So here's the alias name that I've redefined, I defined earlier. Here's the control question, open switch number 1. The control group says who is allowed to control items on the web page. In other words, which users have the privilege to perform this control action. You set which control group is able to have the permission to control this particular element. And we could go into that in a little bit more detail, but each user that's set up on the OrionLX has a collection of privileges. Some of those privileges are, do I have the privilege to control a device on a web page? And this is where you set those control levels. Here's the dialog box here, yes, open switch, are you sure? So I put those parameters in there. You can have them appear in a customized way on the web page. Now the breaker control has a different type of dialog, breaker, trip, close, control breaker, trip breaker, close breaker, are you sure? And again, you can put in whatever dialog you want there. So when we go back to our web page, right here, it's that code that we just saw there in the NCD file that gives us the labeling for these devices here. So we can trip the breaker, yes. Close the breaker. And so that gives you an idea of the animation of certain elements in the page. Of course, there's a little bit more to it than that, but that's fairly comprehensive for basic breaker and switch control. There are more things that can be done, but that actually covers what most people do. I'm getting back up here. Okay. Anyway, we talked about the final steps. There are other functions that we've added in, blinking and tagging. When you see that drop-down window, you'll see there's additional selections for alarm configuration and tagging configuration. And for your alarm configuration, you do have the selection currently to blink an alarm point, to blink something on the screen in response to an input condition coming in this case, com fail. So you could have an element animated to blink when com fail was true. And active unacknowledged alarms will blink. Also with tagging, there's a tagging bar there, and tagging basically, hold on a second, tagging basically associates the placement of a tag with a certain point. In this case, breaker control at logic, we create a logical point, and the output point mapped to the selected XML file can be tagged, and from there, the number, again, that tagging visibility, that number, similar to the control group that we had earlier, this corresponds to the configured user groups with permissions to install or remove tags. Not everybody is typically permitted to install or remove tags. So what you do is you'd have that as an associated user privilege. We show that on our screen. We'll come back to this. Basically, there's 3 tags: out of service tag, do not operate tag, information tag. The definition for that out of service means that you can't open it or close it. Do not operate means you can't close it. Information tags is any piece of information that you'd like to associate with a controllable element. Unusual noise, something like that, you could type in. It still does permit control, but it provides information to the operator. Let's go back online with the demonstrator, and we'll show you what that looks like. If we wanted to put a tag on this, we go to the tags here. And so it says no tags are found. There are no tags. So we go to our tag editor. In this case, we have our different tag types that appear here. Let's say we want to make an out-of-service tag. Out-of-service tag. You apply that tag. One thing nice, every time you create a tag or remove a tag, there's a timestamp log that appears in your diagnostic window, so you can have a complete record of who put a tag on, when they put a tag on. That'll be a complete history of all your tagging, so that can be retrieved and reviewed. This is the out-of-service tag, and you can see the time when we applied that. And so if we return to the HMI, well, now this is going to have a tag on it. So if I try to control this, it doesn't let me control it. So I hit the control button and nothing happens. These control requests can also be logged. So if I edit the tags, I can remove the tag. If I have permission, obviously, I can remove the tag, and I could put another tag on there. I could put an information tag, and it could say call a certain number, noise, whatever you want to put in there. So you could apply an information tag, and by applying an information tag, now when I want to control this device, I will see the information tag, but I still can control devices. And one optional feature that I don't have enabled here is some people like to show a graphical element on the screen when something's tagged. If you remember back here in the Inkscape drawing, we showed a do not operate tag and showed the letter T. You can designate what the tag symbol should look like. You can have, in this case, there's no tagging symbol that's used, but when you try to do control, you see that something's tagged. Some people like to see a tag before they try to control something. So yes, if something's tagged, you can have a graphical element. that appears on the screen in a location that you designate using a symbol. It could be a copy and pasted photograph, or it could be something you design, your own tagging symbol that can appear when something's tagged. Indirect addressing, those of you that have busy substations with lots of breakers will like this. This is a standard programming technique where we use a kind of a wildcard that can be populated when you load the page. And I'll try to describe this in simple terms. It's probably going to be very easy for some folks, but some of the concepts are new. The objective in any system, of course, is to reduce the effort to configure display points on pages that must be replicated many, many times. The best example of this is where, let's say you have a substation that has 25 breakers or more. And let's say each breaker has the same type of protective relay, protecting the line. And let's say you have 70 or 80 points that have to be read from each one of those breakers and displayed on your zoom screens for each of those breakers. Well, you certainly don't want to have to configure all of those points for every breaker, particularly when each of the relays on all those breakers is the same. So what you can do is make sure that the nomenclature for each of those points, when you set those up originally, make sure the nomenclature is similar. And then what you can do is you can use a wildcard and then populate that wildcard when you load the page. So, for example, here's a rather busy industrial substation. This is actually a real image from an industrial plant. In this case, there's 33 breakers. They're actually not protected by 351S's, but I wanted to use that as an example. But let's say they were, and let's say you wanted to create a zoom screen. That zoom screen below is an actual zoom screen from a system. And you'll notice that this zoom screen has quite a bit of animated data below the image. There is time and date when certain demands and peaks were encountered. There's certain real-time values. There's actually over 80 real-time values that are used to animate that particular screen, that zoom screen. And obviously, to configure 80 real-time points for each of these relays, for each of those 30-something breakers, that would be very tedious. So what we do is, we'll first look at the normal process. The normal process would be create a graphic screen offline, typing in placeholders wherever a real-time value will be displayed. Then highlight the placeholder one by one, populate points selected from the drop-down pick list. And by following this procedure, 33 identical zoom screens, you'd have over 2,500 points to configure, and it would be very time-consuming. So what we do instead, we use indirect addressing to simplify the effort. What we do is, in our points list there, instead of saying max IA value at feeder 312, we say max IA value at wildcard. And the wildcard indication is that bracket %, then the feeder, and feeder is a parameter that we're going to define, and then we close it out with the percentage sign and the closed bracket. And so what happens here is any place where feeder is enclosed with those symbols, it will be replaced with the feeder's value when the page is loaded in the browser. So you have all these other feeders, feeder 311, feeder 310, feeder 309, and when those values are loaded, now you automatically will be selecting the right point. Take a look, let's see what that looks like. So, when we create the page link, remember how we talked about how you put the URL for the page? What we do is we append, at the end of the page link, we append a definition for what feeder is. In this case, we define feeder for that particular position as feeder 312. So the zoom screen for that Schweitzer relay at that particular feeder, that zoom screen for feeder 312 will be populated with all the points that say feeder 312 when this page is loaded. So again, the URL that loads the page carries the definition for what that wildcard is. Saves a lot of time. In a similar way, you can use wildcards. Oh yeah, I wanted to say the link there above, that link means when you click on this element on the one-line diagram, go to a page called Zoom SVG, and everywhere the word feeder appears, replace with feeder 312. Okay. Other uses for indirect addressing. The title of the page can be dynamically changed based on using an indirect address. So what you could do if you have a Zoom screen, we got a lot of Zoom screens that all pretty much look the same, have the same basic structure. You can have the title animated as well. And finally, you can populate the XML data file with a wildcard as well. So instead of putting in pointdata.xml, you can replace it with an indirect address that will be populated when you load the page. So you can animate actually quite a bit of this. Okay, moving on, let's talk about a little bit about making web pages secure. There are at least a half a dozen things you can do. First, obviously, use an encrypted protocol. Orion does support HTTPS, which is an encrypted session between Orion and the browsing PC. You can set up a firewall. Orion does cover the firewall where you can restrict access to specific IP addresses and TCPs and protocols. The next is set up specific user privileges. Make it so that certain users are only able to view web pages. Not everybody needs to view a web page. Some people can go through your typical terminal emulation menus to get what they need. Maybe an administrator doesn't need to see all your active web pages that have been customized. So you can set up privileges so that some folks can't view the web pages. You also can set up privileges to control devices. You can restrict control, just like you can restrict the acknowledgement of alarms and the application and the removal of tags. That adds a lot of security when you know that only a designated group of people that you trust are able to do the things that are critical. IP address lockout. You can make it so that certain pages are only viewable by pre-specified IP addresses. And as a further check, you can make it so that control actions are only possible from pre-specified IP addresses. And finally, you can make it so that the pages that are served out from the Orion are viewed on a monitor as direct video. Obviously, if you can get rid of the PC and the routable protocol that's used to view the pages, if you can do that with direct video, that saves, and let's say it simplifies your efforts to make something secure. And there's a direct video terminal. We'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. Talk about viewing OrionLX web pages. There's two ways to view web pages. You can view the pages with a PC, or you can view the pages with a VGA monitor. Here's a hypothetical substation with IEDs connected to the Orion. There's some that are attached serially and some Bitronics devices attached with Ethernet. So the first way to view web pages would be to have some industrial PC running a browser, and you'd have a monitor and a keyboard connected. Orion serves out web pages to that PC. You also could have remote clients able to view web pages. Orion certainly can serve out web pages to multiple clients. Now, as far as viewing the pages, all modern web browsers except Internet Explorer natively support the SVG format. But an SVG plugin is available for Internet Explorer, the Adobe SVG viewer. There's a few visual shortcomings, but it does work fine. Then there's a new direct video option, doesn't require a PC with a browser, and we'll talk about that next. So that's our second option. And basically the way that works is you directly attach a monitor and a keyboard to the Orion. Basically, there's a VGA port on the back of the Orion. In the case there, I show two connections. There's a keyboard connection, but the two connections to the monitor would be for, say, a touch screen. And with a touch screen, you have a separate USB connection for the touch part of the VGA monitor. Anyway, the VGA monitor, as I mentioned before, is attached to the optional multimedia board on the Orion. This multimedia board makes these additional connections available, the VGA connection, the extra USB connections. The keyboard and mouse attached with USB ports as well. Those of you that use Orion note that there are already two USB ports on the back of the Orion, USB 2 and 3. Those ports are enabled and available when using the direct video option. There's the multimedia board. Let's take a closer look at that. Again, it's an optional card, and it has several ports. There's, on the upper right-hand corner, you see the USB ports. There's the VGA port in blue. And we've also included an audio port on the bottom there. That's an audio port similar to what your PC would have. And finally, there's an Ethernet port. We've actually brought out a third Ethernet port on this multimedia board. That has a separate network interface controller, and that becomes ETH2. So now you have, on an Orion that's ordered with two Ethernet ports, this optional multimedia board makes it so that you have a third Ethernet port. Let's see if I can get the slides caught up here. There's the audio out, again, very much like on a PC. And there's that third Ethernet port, copper 100. There's the multimedia board installed on the back of the Orion, just above the power supplies. And one thing, it's kind of nice, viewing flexibility. The pages that are served out from the Orion and viewable as direct video are also viewable by any browsing PC. So just because you're using the direct video option, it doesn't mean that you lose the ability to browse the pages with a PC-based browser. The same page that's viewed on the VGA monitor can be viewed by any browsing PC. Another element of browsing flexibility, if you have another device that's attached to the Orion in the substation or even remotely, I wouldn't suggest remote connections outside that firewall that out, but it is possible to view the web pages that are served out from the devices that are connected to the Orion. In this case, the Bitronics instruments, the ones on the lower left side, those Bitronics instruments are serving out web pages. And if you have very good eyes, the screen that's shown connected to the Orion, that screen actually is a web page served from the Bitronics instrument. So by putting in the address of that instrument for that page, you can view pages from other web-enabled devices in the substation. The Orion comes set up to block that and to block external access through the firewall, but that can be specifically enabled by an IT administrator with privileges. Okay. Again, web pages from other IDs can be viewed. We do offer a VGA monitor that's hardened for substation use. This one is powered directly with 48 or 125 VDC. It has fairly good resolution, pretty good brightness, contrast ratio, and viewing angle. And it's available in 4 different models. There's a standard model that we can ship very quickly. That's the 125 DC 19-inch rack mount model, but there's also 48-volt models and panel mount models as well. So it's panel or rack, 48 or 125. We do have pretty good training courses on our web-based capabilities, creating web pages. We have a very good instructor, and we have course material. So if you want us to come up and give you a custom course, we can do that. Actually, we have a collection of courses for pretty much all of the advanced options on the Orion. Mostly we do that on site, and we are, again, willing to customize that so that it can be very specifically related to what you do. One thing we've done very successfully is we'll actually create one of your pages that you will use in the substation as part of the training. And then by doing that, you can typically create the pages on your own after that. And the 2 standard courses we have are WebServer and Alarm Archive Retentive. Alarm Archive Retentive is the alarm annunciation and the sequence of events capability. And I think that brings us to our last slide. Feel free to email me any questions that you'd like answered. We will give you a considered response. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll be doing more of these webinars. Probably the next one will have to do with a relay interface, and that'll probably be in about a month. But also let us know the topics that you're interested in. We like to do these, and we will post the contents of this to our website. We have posted up there right now. We have webinars on basic Orion configuration. We have a webinar, I believe, on DA, and another more recent one on the direct video capabilities on the Orion. Each of those are about 45-minute webinars that go through all that. But thank you very much for attending. And again, give us your feedback so we can make these things better. See you later.